Digits team. If you're newer to Digits and you found our webinar today, welcome. Happy to have you here. A little bit of background on us is we are a independent retail media agency. We are based out of Minneapolis, founded in 2016. Excited to continue to be growing fast along with the retail media industry. And we're part of the Inc. 5000 for fastest growing private companies. Based out of Minneapolis, probably not a surprise that Target is a flagship retailer for us from a support side. So as Digits, we do support retail media and digital activities at Target across the whole flywheel, from Roundel to paid search to Target Circle to PDP pages to social as well. So we are a full service agency for digital and retail media into Target. Last year, we supported businesses around $6 billion in annual revenue. So a pretty wide breadth of business for Target sales specifically. Run or analyze over 150 media campaigns and set up and manage about 6,000 different promotions across Circle and promotion COE. So a ton of data. And our goal is to bring that to you guys today. Question from the chat. Will the recording be shared? Yes, absolutely. So we actually run a YouTube channel, and everything we do just gets posted to that. So we'll send you a link to that if you want to look at it afterwards. Also, if you're newer to us, a ton of the work we do as an agency is around Target Circle. Still remains Target's #1 digital traffic driver. If that's newer to you as a business, on our website, just go. We actually do a free Target Circle market share report. So just let us know what category you're in, what brand you're in, fill out the report, and we'll send you a report for about the last year of who's run Circle in your business, who's active, who's not, and potentially your opportunity to drive traffic within that space. So shifting to today. So today we are here to talk about Roundel. And we're getting a little bit ahead of it. If you see on the screen here at 2026, which will come sooner than later. But the goal for today is how do we start to plan ahead? How do we help gain budgets and get ahead of sort of 2026 planning and 2026 budget alignment specifically? So fortunately, it's not just me here today. We have a panel that I'd kind of like to welcome into the discussion here. So the first one to talk through is Graham. So Graham Mills, a gentleman I was lucky enough to meet a short while ago as introduced actually by a friend, one of my neighbors, Mary Pickering, if anybody knows Mary, sort of a former P&G folk, but she said, Dave, you got to meet Graham. He's a smart gentleman in this area, and he is leaving P&G, looking to kind of continue to stay involved in the space. And so Graham and I have met, and we started talking Roundel and retail media, and I'd say we share similar sort of thoughts from various spots. So Graham and I needed to start to work together and kind of bring some of this knowledge to you guys. So that's my quick background on Graham. Graham, why don't you take off your mute and kind of give everybody a bit of a background on yourself? So
thanks, Dave. Hi, everybody. So Dave hit a couple of the high points. I'm a longtime insights and strategy leader. Most of my career was spent at Procter & Gamble. Have done a lot of brand and retail work, and areas of emphasis. Part of the reason why I think Dave and I had a lot to talk about is I've spent a lot of time in media, both mass media and retailer media. And for my last 4 years before I left P&G, I was working the P&G Target account, where we were spending a lot of time thinking about exactly this topic we're talking today in terms of planning ahead for media spending with Roundel. These days, I'm running an advisory company working with big and small brands on many of these same kinds of questions. So it's a great opportunity. Thanks, Dave, for the invite, and looking forward to talking this with everybody today.
Awesome. Thanks, Graham. And then also we have our Digits resident Roundel expert, Mallory. So Mallory is joining as well today. Mallory, can you give us some of your background and introduce yourself too?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. As Dave mentioned, Mallory Becker. I'm an account director here. I lead up a lot of our media work, so both first party and third party across non-alc categories as well as alcohol categories. I spent many years at Target, so just about 15 years, a majority of that on the digital side. So site merchandising, core merchandising, but a lot of it Roundel. So I spent just over 5 years at Roundel, within grocery, within kitchen, within floor care, a lot of different categories. So I'm excited to kind of dig deep in my brain and talk a little bit about Roundel today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Mallory. It's great to have your perspective from a former Roundel, now on the agency brand side, how this all kind of works together. So we're here today to specifically sort of talk about how we can budget for Roundel, how we can continue to grow that presence for us as target leaders within our CPGs. And the reason that's important is Target's sales driving digital levers continue to grow. So as digits, we think most levers fall into one or two buckets, whether it's promotions, whether it's media. Both of them have grown significantly at Target, and we project to continue to do that. And so it's no longer okay to just have flat budgets within that space. So 2024 numbers across our client base, promotions ended the year around 15% up year over year as far as demarkdown spend within most of our clients. The media side on average was around 20% up. So that is the baseline that Roundel is working with. Doesn't mean every CPG grew to that number. Some more, some less, some new accounts for them, but in total they're up 20%. The other part of it, if you've seen articles recently, Walmart specifically was catching a little bit of negative PR because they're apparently requesting 25 to 50% growth next year from brands. And so, how to accomplish that as a brand, I think, is probably a difficult conversation internally. How are you finding more dollars? And I think that's a lot of what we're here to unpack today. Before we get into the exact specifics, just to get the ice broke a little bit and get things rolling, we want to talk a little bit about why ads are important a little bit. And so I wanted to ask both Graham and Mallory and anybody in the chat, if you are interested to share, what was the last ad you saw and did it actually make you buy something? Or what is the last ad that maybe made you buy something that you remember? Because obviously our whole goal here is to get people to buy more products through the ad. So Graham, since you're the guest, I'm going to start with you. What's your example?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I had a different answer if you'd asked me 24 hours ago, Dave, but actually this very morning I got what I think was a Roundel streaming placement on YouTube for Easter. And my wife had reminded me last night that in our house, the Easter Bunny does not reuse Easter baskets. A part of the magic is having a new vessel every year. We don't have one. Time's running out. And Target reminded me that they have all that in stock. So it was timely. I'll be there later tonight. And I think the ad definitely was the right place, the right time for me.
That sounds great. Easter is only a couple hours away. So
it's amazing.
Yeah. Mallory, what about you?
Mine's a little different. So I have seen these ads for probably months, but then I finally saw the product at Target, and that is Magic Spoon cereal. It is a protein cereal. So if you're a woman in your midlife, protein is king. And so I had to bite the bullet and buy it. But it's not a cheap cereal. So it's like $8, $9 a box. So it's mom's cereal. It is no one else's. My 6-year-old was having a bowl of it the other morning when I came downstairs, and I quickly put a stop to that. So thumbs up if anybody on the call is from there. It's delicious. So I recommend.
That sounds good. Yeah, I am loosely familiar with that brand. I've seen it a little bit. I've not yet tried it. I haven't jumped in the pool, the expensive cereal. So that's good.
It's a treat.
My example is, for those that have heard me talk before, about 80% of my groceries come digitally. So I'm very much an in-app past purchase shopper. And so ads are actually necessary to break through for me, because otherwise I just am in a cycle. And so actually my daughter was looking for granola. She bought some Love Crunch peanut butter chocolate. I'm sure some very indulgent granola. And so she takes my phone and uses the Target app to buy granola that she likes. And that was the one that she found just a couple of days ago. And I saw it was definitely a sponsored placement in the granola search. So whoever out there actually supplies that one, you did your job. So, well, awesome. Well, that I think at least sets the stage a bit for what we are trying to do with ads is to get people to try new products and to get folks to really increase sales, a lot of obviously through those new products. So, all right, well, we are here today, and a lot of times when we talk to brands of our clients, their questions are, we're starting to plan for next year. How do we start to get more dollars in budget for Target and for Roundel specifically? And really, I frame this question at the Target team leads or the Target shopper lead. Typically, they're the ones that are getting pushed to this. And wouldn't it be great if we just all had more money, right? Like if we figured it out, because all of a sudden your budgets go up, you can buy more traffic, you can drive more business, and really it makes your life a bit easier as a sales lead on that side of it. So that was really the question when Graham and I first met. We started talking about that, right? Like how do you earn that as a brand? And I'd say the words that specifically that Graham used and that we kind of came up with was really this term of investment grade media, right? Like it's that term resonated with me, and I think a lot of it was the impetus for this webinar. Was kind of growing that. So Graham, without getting too deep into it yet, I want to turn over to you. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
How do you kind of relate to that term?
Yeah, I think in my time, both with P&G and more recently, one of the things that has been very clear to me is, media dollars are there to be had across most brand enterprises. And I had worked on brands before I had spent time at retail. So working with the brands on media allocation and how you define a good media investment. Really, and I think we'll talk a little later about how you set up a media plan on a brand. But what was interesting to me is there were very consistent norms, sometimes data, sometimes judgment, but there's like a threshold for what's a good spend and what's not a good spend. And what I would say is this idea of investment grade to me means it's a dollar that you can spend on media that will generate a return back to that brand team, and that it's competitive with what the marketplace offers in the media space. So, often when we talk retail media, it's not always a part of that conversation. So one of the things that I'm passionate about is making sure that spending that happens through retail and media networks can carry its own weight and be competitive with other types of media investments. That's, I think, in my experience, been the key to unlocking more dollars because you're competing with the bulk of where those dollars are spent by most brands today, which is not necessarily in the retail space. So it creates an opportunity to accelerate the spend, no doubt.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because I think even just using that term and trying to ask yourself, does my organization think of my Roundel spend as investment grade? And if the answer is no, because it's just a JBP or just a donation or just a tax, then yeah, you're going to have a real hard time trying to get more money because that's not how your organization, that's not how your brand teams think of it. And so what I hope out of this webinar for the people on the call is that the next slide is we have sort of this framework of how to create investment grade or how to ask yourself questions within your organization to get there. And so if everybody on the call can sort of answer for themselves whether or not they think that they're there at this point or where you're at on that journey, how long you've been doing retail media, you might be close to that, or you might be brand new and you're very far off of what investment grade might be. And so we're going to introduce this sort of 4-step framework. And I'd say for, again, those on the call, kind of think along through your own org. Where are you at on that journey kind of as we go through? So our first step really is sort of budgets. So how does your brand budget their dollars and really understanding that as an organization? So Graham, within your history, is this pretty consistent? Like how does this work with the different CPGs you've talked to and advised?
Yeah, I do see consistency. The words sometimes are different, but what I have seen through my experiences is there tends to be three really main marketing objectives. Two are the dominant ones. One is an upper funnel objective where you're spending dollars to try to drive awareness. This, tends to happen at certain points during a brand cycle. Launching new news is often the most common cause of upper funnel spending, but that has its own you do that to get eyeballs and to drive awareness, which is something that we all know drives the flywheel for strong and growing brands. Is you've got to continually be bringing in new consumers, and so upper funnel spend tends to be keyed toward broader audiences and hitting the key differentiating dynamics of the brand or product you're talking about. Lower funnel spend tends to be about conversion. And I'm sure many of the folks on the call have a lot of experience thinking through what are the various ways that conversion happens. These days, a lot of spending in social media happens there, programmatic media for brands that are getting into that to really find the audiences that are most likely to be able to close on things and make that happen. And then for better or worse, I'm going to say for worse, there's often a third separate bucket called retailer media. And in the brands and companies that I've worked with, it is most often been managed just a bit differently. The good news maybe is that there's a little less scrutiny and a little less controls put on it. But in my experience, it's a little unusual to see that budget move more than a point or two a year because frankly, it's considered an expense by a lot of brands to say, and you mentioned it earlier, Dave, relationship building, maybe the sort of thing that could give you momentum. If I spend this, maybe you could be a part of a package that gets you merchandising placement and visibility, some kind of promotions. That's not unvaluable. And some brands, some retailers can get margin credit for this kind of investment, right? So it's valuable on its own terms, but as a result, historically, I've seen it quarantined into a separate area, even though I think most of us that have spent time in the retailer media space know that that spending drives upper or lower funnel depending on how you're spending it, where those placements are. So I think that the challenge that I've seen is how do you get that retailer media investment to be viewed strategically as an upper or lower funnel investment? And that's where the idea of being investment grade. How do you line up against the other places your brand is spending in those? If you've spent most of your time on the retailer facing side, you might not have had a lot of experience or visibility to that. This for me would be a good set of questions if I were talking to my brand leaders about what are the main upper and lower funnel spends and why are those the places where you're spending the money. That will give you some clues on how that money gets allocated and justified. Frankly, become the list of barriers that you want to think about as you're trying to move retailer media a little more into those spaces and in consideration for those dollars.
Yeah, I think sales teams people are having to be sort of junior media people, right? As retail media has grown in importance and in budget and in dollars, you might not be somebody that grew up in the media world, but I would say if you don't have an understanding of how brands are budgeting their media, it's really hard to make a case for your clients, for your accounts, right? And so I think, this might be knowledgeable. If you're a shopper marketer person who's worked at a company for 5-10 years, you might have a pretty good understanding of how your organization budgets, right? If you're newer or newer to this world, these are questions I think you need to ask and understand how do you start to break through within the space.
One quick point to build there, Dave. In my experience, also working with the awesome buyers and divisionals that I've worked with at Target, it's a newer space for them, particularly those that have been around a while. And so, in my experience, those opportunities might not come with a bow on them from your merchant partners. It's the opportunity for you to reach out and say, "Hey, I was thinking about our media strategy. I think we could do this differently." I know that the buyers at Target care a lot about the Roundel investment, but it's not always their core area of focus either. So that junior media expert role can include, inspiring and motivating your buyers too to think more broadly about the impact of that kind of spend.
Yeah. And Mallory, in your experience at Roundel, this is probably a softball question, but if somebody says, "Hey, we got a little extra money and it's brand money," what does that mean to Roundel? Is that something that excites them?
Oh, I mean, of course. It's incremental funding. So yes, absolutely. It excites them. But I think then once you get over that excitement, you have to think about, well, how am I going to responsibly spend this money, right? And so then that's when it comes to really asking the questions of, I've been saying learning plan, right? Like what do we want to get out of this, these additional dollars? And I know we'll talk a lot about this here in a few more slides, but I think it's crucial to aligning upfront on what is the overall goal of added dollars? What are your brand teams? What are your ecom teams? I think bringing in as many teams as possible, understanding what those individual teams objectives are, will only help you and kind of drive those dollars to be as effective as possible.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good lead into our step two. So step two is all around metrics. And I had a conference last week that I was at, and there was like a top five CPG, a head of retail media, or actually head of all media for a CPG was there. And the article about Walmart had just come out with, people getting asked 25, 50%. And so I was a brave soul and raised my hand and said, okay, I know that brands get asked for more money all the time. And, some brands aren't happy to get asked for 25 to 50% more, but the reality is in retail media, it's a growing industry, that's going to happen. So I said, well, how would you want that structured for you if you were going to receive that well as a brand? And he said, well, for us, it's all about the data, right? And for specifically for him is all about MMA media mix model. So he's like, if you're an RMN that's not giving me data that I can plug into my MMM, I'm not going to get you money, right? Like that's just the way to win with me. So I think where I'll open this back up to Graham and Mallory is, well, what is that right data? What metrics? And Mallory, even when you were at Roundel, like which metrics resonated? Is it the same for all CPGs or is it different kind of by bucket?
I mean, I think it's absolutely different. I think, it can be kind of tricky, right? Because you are first and foremost taking a step back of what is the product? Is it new? Is it existing? What sort of data do you have on this product already? Who are you trying to reach? Is it new buyers? Is it existing? So there's so many questions I think you have to ask first and foremost. 5, 10 years ago, it was really all about ROAS. Closed loop attribution wasn't new, but it was kind of the hot word that we could use in our pitches. But today, it's all about incrementality. And I think Roundel does offer iROAS incrementality to some vendors, but it's not widely shared. And I think there's good reason for that, right? I think you have to have, statistical significance and the right size of the business and all of those things. But I think it again, kind of going back to that learning plan is, internally understanding what are those important metrics and KPIs amongst your ecom, your brand teams, your media teams, and bringing that all together and then saying, do those KPIs align to the products that I'm trying to drive and push at Roundel and at Target?
Yeah. And Graham, so within the CPGs you've worked at or advised, like, do you have history examples there where like KPIs were changed and like KPIs?
Yes. Yeah, in a couple of ways, Dave. And I would underline a couple of points Mallory was making. I think one of the things I've seen be really effective when a brand is working with their Roundel counterparts is to start talking about the media objective. And how do you measure media relative to that objective? We talked earlier about upper funnel versus lower funnel. Frankly, looking at ROAS for an upper funnel spend is sort of putting a square peg into a round hole. Reach is usually a metric that's a lot more impactful because that's the goal of an upper funnel spend, which Roundel's offering more and more ways to get into. So that's certainly a metric that Roundel can provide you. I think the question becomes, what's a good number? This is where some of the working back with your brand partners to say, what do you count on the Roundel investment to deliver? What do you count on retail media to deliver in terms of reach? Because we might be able to help you more than you think. There are other ways to deliver reach versus just maybe some of the mass market media spend that a lot of brands are familiar with. So that would be one. And then, yeah, lower funnel, ROAS has been the conversation forever. And I've worked with some brands that have not been very satisfied with the ROAS number. To your point, Dave, for brands that are doing market mix modeling or market mix analysis, that is more of an incrementality measurement. And straight ROAS is very affected by the mass media spending that your brands do. Now, if you're a DTC brand, you're not doing a lot of marketing other than through retail, maybe the difference is more negligible. I've seen for some brands where it can be a factor of 10x or more, the difference between a ROAS number and an incremental ROAS number. So to Mallory's point, I think there's no harm in asking that question. You're trying to understand the incremental benefit of a Roundel investment. Now, what will happen mathematically is your incremental ROAS number is going to be lower than your ROAS number, and maybe significantly so. I think that leads some brands to not want to ask that question because it doesn't look as good in the deck, maybe when you're talking back to folks. But for brands that are looking at incrementality broadly, that are doing market mix analysis or models, those are the numbers they're used to. So seeing a ROAS number of 18, which is I've seen brands deliver a ROAS of 18, is kind of a meaningless number because it depends on what that brand is doing in the mass market. But an incremental ROAS of, I don't know, 1.2 could be really, really competitive investment grade with other investments. So it is a bit ROAS that encourage high spending brands to think incrementally. And then I love the idea, Dave, that you referenced, which is spend time with your brand partners to understand what their market mix analysis is saying. What are the major investments and how good are they? That gives you material you can use in your quarterly reviews with Roundel to work together with them on a learning plan and on a data plan. And my experience with Roundel is every quarter they're offering new and additional metrics in their systems. And it is clients like you guys that have the opportunity to steer that mothership. So steer it toward your market mix analysis variables, because those are the ones that will help you plug in and prove that investment grade hypothesis that we've got.
One other thing too with the incrementality metrics, you got to think about kind of going back to what is the product itself, right? And internally aligning on what do we think a successful iROAS is. Toilet paper and makeup are going to be very different, right? And so I think again, it's going back to the basics of truly level setting within and setting those goals up front and truly being realistic.
Yeah, I mean, I think iROAS is hard. I mean, and that's, I think, if we're talking about this workshop, we're talking about this framework. First step was, well, who owns your budget? How do they budget their money, and what do they care about? Right? Like, and that's seems a little basic, but if you don't know that, then I think you got to start there. And step two is making sure whatever they care about is you're getting that from Target. If that's MMA data, if that's you're launching a new brand, so how many new shoppers you got, like Target is incented to want to give you the data. So they can't always do everything you want, but if they can, they'll try. At least I hope so. The good ones do, sort of in that space. And so that what cares to you as a CPG might be different than your peers, I guess, is some of what we're saying. As well.
I've seen, Dave, that for very good reasons, different types of investments or investments in different platforms have different data that's available to Roundel to give back to clients. So if what you hear is we don't have that or can't give that to you, you could also be asking the question, what kinds of investments have that really strong data feed? If you're thinking about an incremental investment, you don't have to jeopardize or move your core funds out of where they are. You could try to secure incremental investment for more measurable closed loop type of data-based investments. And I think Roundel, the partners that I've worked over there with are very good at saying, oh, well, if measurability is something that matters to you, here are some places we could do that in a way to deliver really robust, fast cycle measurement to prove out the value that you're looking for as a way to secure that incremental funding. And of course, all of this, what's great about this is you're sitting on the same side of the table as your Roundel counterpart in this discussion. You share a common objective, and that I think makes it even easier to work with them to try to define the right sort of investment strategy.
Well, and I think that leads us to sort of our next pillar, if you will, of sort of the workshop model. As I almost called this "Find Your Dance Partner," which is why there's a dance clip art on there. But you're really getting that partnership with Roundel and making that pitch with them internally. So it's not a surprise you have shared growth incentives with Roundel. If you come you get an extra 20%, $1 million, whatever your budget is, your Roundel rep is going to be real happy to hear that because they have growth goals, they have bonuses, they have things they're looking to do, and so they will try to help you grow. And so you need to take them as a partner to help you build this. So Mallory, you used to be a Roundel employee, right? And so you would get these discussions like, what's some examples or history or kind of tips that you have of like approaching your Roundel counterpart, if you're trying to put something together internally?
So your question is, internally at Roundel, how would I work with the teams to put
I
something
know, like if you're the
together?
CPG, right? Like how would you as Roundel want to be approached, right?
Um, I mean, I think openly, I'm communication is king, right? And so it's, if I'm a brand and I have dollars, I'm coming to Roundel. I think everything we've talked about comes into play here of laying out, I have these dollars. I've spoken internally with my teams. These are the things that we want to learn. These are the tactics that we're interested in. On the flip side, Roundel maybe pitching and going to a brand to say, I want to see a 10% increase in investment year over year. That Roundel individual needs to come to the table again with a learning plan built out of these are the things based off of case studies we've seen, based off of historical data we've seen within the category. This is where we think you can grow. It's giving them that data to take to the team. So I think again, it goes both ways. It's coming to the table with again that learning agenda of ultimately what's going to drive the business.
Awesome. Graham, I'm going to interrupt a bit because we did get a question in the chat. Graham, we talked so much about metrics. What's your experience and guidance using third-party lift study for a Roundel campaign?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I have seen and been a part of some of those lift studies. I think they could be very valuable in a couple of ways. First thing I would say is before you pay a third party to do lift studies, as a part of what Mallory's suggesting from a learning plan discussion, to a certain extent, for certain types of investments, Roundel could even do that in partnership with you and deliver strong lift data. There are times when you want to use a third party to connect additional dots of what's happening, and I think that can be valuable. What tends to come out of lift studies are lift numbers, right? So you were able to increase sales by 8% for a particular product that you were advertising through these kinds of placements. I think it's certainly better than nothing. And I think if you are putting myself back in the shoes of guiding brand, like upstream brand media investments, knowing what the sales lift is and what the cost is, you can back into ROI from that, and that will help you think through what those choices are. It will depend on what the other, how big or small the audience is you're going after, what the objective of that particular media campaign is to do. So lift is one of, sales increase is one of the critical metrics, obviously. So I would say if it helps you fill in a blank on a data type that you don't otherwise have access to, and it allows you to talk to your brand partners back at headquarters about turning something that's sort of a conceptual benefit into a real one, I'd say go for it. Just realize that Roundel may be able to help you there and help you save some money on the measurement. And at the same time, you'll want to work to convert that sales lift into however those brands are doing their market mix work, which could be as simple in many cases as converting it to ROI. So long as you can have that lift tied to a specific spend, I think you could be on your way to having a new kind of conversation that you're not having today.
Yeah, one of the things, Graham, that we offer as Digits, I'd say like some of our top 10 CPG partners, ones that run lots of campaigns and, I'd say spend lots of money, is they have national media agencies that supports this business for them that analyze, writes briefs, analyzes and whatnot. So, but they'll have us come in about once a year and do a Roundel audit where we will run kiosk reporting against all of their campaigns. We can match it up with VIQ in the right way. It depends on the client and whatnot. And then we'll essentially deliver to them, like a point in time study on how we thought their Roundel worked, right? And it just gives them a second viewpoint, I'd say from a very target informed agency, that maybe their national agency, they're working across 5, 10, 15, 20 different RMNs, and they might not know the depth of target. So we'll provide that level of benchmark typically for like a target audience, like a target office. So
I love that. And benchmark is another really good point, Dave. Being able to talk about this relative to what you know normatively to be true, I think could help you really seize on which things are the ones that make the biggest differences, that are the biggest movers, and those are the ones that are most likely to get funded too when you bring that forward. So that makes a lot of sense.
all right, so we are now on the last pillar of our workshop here, which is execution. So I'd say, congrats. Now what, right? Like you got 20% growth, 40% growth, whatever it was you were aiming for, right? So, how do you spend that money, right? And what are the right tips in this space to make it effective? I know, Mallory, in our discussions, there was a couple of points that were sort of, that resonated with you. And so like, what's your advice to brands that, get that money and are having like a growth year? How do they set themselves up for success?
I think it's about balance, in my opinion. I think it's, going with the tried and true tactics that will continue to drive the business and produce the results you want. But I think this is your opportunity to test and learn, right? So, and again, it kind of goes back to what was, established from the beginning of what do we want to learn from this? But I think about the ability to use some of those shiny tactics like CTV and YouTube and being able to measure that. I mean, that's huge for a brand team to be able to test into that and actually get measurable results versus doing it on their own, and having more third party results come in. This is true, one to one. So I think selfishly, maybe for a brand, it's obviously beneficial because you're getting such a deeper dive into the results and who's engaging with your media specifically within those channels.
Got it. Yeah. I think using the new tactics is a good one because sometimes, kind of looping back on the workshop idea, something like CTV might be interesting to a brand owner who has upper funnel media, right? And so you sort of almost loop back all the way through and say, oh, you're interested in CTV and you haven't done a ton as a brand. If you have extra funds, let's run it through this whole framework as a way. But I know one of the things that came out of our discussion, in our prep session, and I'll throw this one to you, Graham, to add on is, the idea of a JVP commit, right? So, how do we, I'll say it a different way. Lots of times when we talk to brands, they'll say, I'm worried about giving more money to Target because then they're going to expect it every single year, right? And it gets grandfathered into my baseline and I can't promise it to them every year because one, it might not work, or two, I might not have the money, right?
Yeah.
So what's your advice to people that are struggling with that?
It's a very real dynamic. I've seen it a number of different times. The root of my advice is I don't think that's a great reason not to secure incremental money and drive your business. At the same time, I mean, clarity of expectations is really important. So this is where I've been involved in conversations with some of my Roundel partners over the years that say, if we go get this for now, we'll try again next year. But would we rather have it than not have it for this year? And, ultimately, do you want it to be structured that it counts against your JBP spending for this year? There may be a short-term benefit to your business to do that, depending on how you structured your JBP. But there could also be value in saying this is not even really a JBP deliverable. This is an opportunistic way to build the business together, help you and I hit metrics that we think are valuable and to drive our joint business. And then I would, get in writing, frankly, because we know that people change rules, right? And so there could be new leaders tomorrow that look at this and say, oh, your spend last year was X. So we'll assume that this year is going to be X, 1.2X.
And that's when you pull out the receipts, right? Where you're
That's
like,
when you pull out the receipts.
actually, we had this email.
So I want to say go for it, and then just make very clear that you're going for it on the condition that this is, a 1X for now, and hopefully proves out and creates additional money in the future. But if it requires a commitment for the future, you're not going to be able to get the money in the first place. My guess is sooner rather than later, your Roundel partner will shift to your side of the table in that discussion, because even proving it out, I think we all know that if you find a technique that works, if you truly get investment grade, there will be more money in the future. But you want to have the room to experiment and test, and know that you're not the decision maker for that money. So yeah, I would say go for it.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, sitting on the other side of the table, if you forget about media and you're thinking more just like assortment, there's plenty of years where Target leans into a brand for a Christmas assortment or a sales plan or an end cap, and it doesn't work. And then you know what? Target doesn't do it the next year, right? And so I would say as a CPG, you should have the license to, do the same thing. Lean into it once, give it a shot. I'm interested. I found some money, and not be held for it every single time.
And if you approach this conversation from day zero with your Roundel partner as a test and learn plan, even if in your mind you're hoping to get a sizable amount of money to learn with, I've seen that the conversations do change. They qualitatively change. Mallory can probably speak to this as well. If you have an opportunity for incremental work to go learn, the learning is as valuable to Roundel as it is to you if you're trying new things. And yes, there'll be hopefully a business return on that as well, and maybe a pipeline in the future. But a test and learn, I think, gets approached from day zero differently than marketing budget increase, which tends to operate just as you're saying, Dave, which is it's now in the base, which, we don't want that to be a deterrent to growing your business.
Um, so I've got one last comment, and then I think we're going to turn it over to questions here because we got one question that came in, and then we'll just open it up. So just on the framework, there was sort of a third line that just says run it via programmatic. And I don't think maybe not everybody in the call knows what that means. And so to say it like you can use Trade Desk, you can use different DSPs to run it through your agency. Many people on the call have national agencies that have seats at Trade Desk. If you don't, we as Digits have a seat at the Trade Desk, and we can run it for you. The reason that that's beneficial is it is more than sort of the other side of the line, right? It's not a managed service campaign. It just runs a little differently. And if you want to set it up to test and control differently, you own that as a brand. And so it kind of just takes it off the tracks in the same way as it did before. So if that's new to or interesting to anybody on the call, reach out and we can educate you. Mallory leads all that up from our side.
And I would note that you do get credit. You do get, I believe, 80% credit.
Yeah, it depends on DSP fees and agency fees and all that.
Yeah. But there is some level of credit that is still given for that.
Yep. Okay, so we are going to shift into Q&A. And there is a Q&A that is up. I'll read it out loud, and I think it is open to either of you. So you guys go for it. So what is the best advice to manage JBP margin? Having a Roundel investment drive target margins higher at the expense of ours. So anything experience around managing JBP margin plus or minus with Roundel?
Mallory, do you want to jump in there, or you want me to give thoughts?
Graham, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's tough to soundbite, but I think there's a reality here that there are only so many dollars to go around. And so when you're I think what's built into the context of this question is when you're spending with Roundel, Target loves that as a revenue source for them. And if those dollars are coming out of spend that could otherwise land you in your JBP deliverables, then it looks like a net zero sort of a tug of war. I think this is where I'd call back a couple things we've talked about so far today. The first is striving for incrementality of dollars can help circle this square square the circle, because you'll be able to bring additional funding from a different source that could help drive your sales and category sales. So breaking the model of there's one pool of dollars, do I get credit for it, or does Target get credit for it? Who actually gets the margin out of it? I think is important because that changes the nature of the conversation. It changes the pool that you have to work with. On more baseline investment, I think this is where, my recommendation is to hold Roundel to an account that says we need to deliver more than just a spend that generates a VI credit and, has a low level impact. We need to actually be able to drive our business too. That's the nature of what the spend needs to deliver. That can change a little bit the frame of the conversation on where that spending will go. I realize there's not a lot of wiggle room on, your JBP once it's negotiated and the terms that Target has for its Roundel spend and where that credit goes. But I think the more you can change the frame up front at the beginning of the year about what kind of money you're going to get to spend and what it's for, you may be able to influence that in a different way. So that would be a little bit calling back to the earlier incrementality discussion. Mallory, what's your experience been in this space?
Yeah, as you were talking, transparently, your Roundel contact isn't super involved in the specifics of that JBP agreement, right? share with the buyer X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, they're really only given what that number is that you've agreed upon. But in my experience, I think you hit it on the head, Graham, of, not to take away from Roundel investment, but what are those other buckets where you can invest that are going to benefit your business and Target's business? Again, I'm not an expert within all of those buckets, but come 2026, making sure maybe there is an asterisk of having that flexibility to shift around if needed.
Yeah, I think that the merchants view Roundel as one of a number of levers, right? So
Exactly.
I realize the Roundel team, Mallory, as you're saying, has its own goals. They want to drive revenue of plus X%, but most of us in our JVPs are bound to, the total spending platform with Target and what it delivers. So that's where getting into what you can deliver with Circle spend versus Roundel spend versus call it historical merchandising spends on promotion, getting as savvy as you can get about that and being able to flow money across buckets to ensure that your JVP's met as your first priority, I think is great. And then there may be other ways to fill the Roundel bucket, which are a lot of the ideas we're talking about earlier in this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So obviously you want to manage it within the box. That makes a lot of sense. I would say very tactically, a good number of our larger CPG clients as digits, when they're going through the year, they're about two-thirds of the way through the year, and they're like, oh, we are good on our JBP spend, right? Like we are going to hit our margins, but yet we still have money left over, and we don't want to over deliver our JBP because the reality, like for all we're talking about doing one-time investments, whatnot, sometimes like depending on who you are, you might not want to do that. And so then that's where they'll say, that's when they'll buy media through digits. They'll buy media third party. They'll be like, I still want to drive X, traffic to Target. I just will start to use other sources, right? And so, that is pretty commonplace, I think, within certain brands of, they've tapped out their target budget, which is the majority of their budget, but they still have a little left money and they'll use it other ways to still impact their business positively. So next question, a little bit more of a negative one, I think, because there's been some bad press in the Target world over the last couple of months. But reading the question says, with Target's recent store traffic and sales decline due to DEI and leakage, how do we think about our Roundel investment differently, or do we think about it differently?
Yeah.
And so I'll let you guys think on that for a sec,
I,
just as I chat on it. But I mean, I would say our data does show Target sales is down. The last number of weeks has been impacted both physically and digitally. There's also some negatives because of the Easter shift. So I'm sure all the brand partners in the call are thinking of that, but I'd say in my years at Target as a merchant, Easter was always the biggest wonky move. Like you just never knew exactly how much it was moving your numbers, but Easter and spring always threw numbers off. So I'll just use that as a little bit of caution of like, well, how bad really are the numbers? Because that's a double whammy right there kind of in the last couple of weeks. But now that I've delayed enough, I'll turn it over to you. Graham, it seems like you got something in your
well,
brain.
I was just going to say that this question, yeah, I mean, the framing is a very realist framing. This might have been a really good one for our title slide for this presentation, because I actually think that looking at Roundel Investments as investment grade media as a goal sort of gets you out of a little bit of the Target sales are declining. What are we going to do about it? Because if you're delivering investment grade media, what that means is at Target and broadly, because we know that sales happen at Target and other places, if you're able to measure it the same way that you're able to measure a traditional media measurement and it's competitive, then the good news is your brands are whole or growing. And of course, we'd love for Target to be a disproportionate beneficiary of that. But Roundel's really a media agency. They play across the space, obviously with the goal of driving traffic to Target, but there's lots of value that could be gotten from it. So if you're not able to differentiate the value of that spend, and it becomes just a JBP margin relationship play, I think it gets harder to reverse trends that we know when traffic is down X%, your business is probably down something like X%. And so finding ways to multiply the impact of that media spend inside and outside of Target, I think creates another lever for growth. I would say the nature of this question is also probably what are in the minds of some of your brand partners that are upstream at headquarters. And I think that this could shift the narrative a little bit also to say, yeah, I mean, if the impact was only to Target, Maybe, but we actually want to view this as a media investment for you that benefits the total market for your brand. And I think that gets you into a different kind of conversation.
One other thing too, and this is kind of a little more tactical, but thinking about the creative itself that you're running with Roundel. Do you amplify circle offer? Granted, I understand that's an additional expense, but something that's only available at Target. Drive them into the app, drive them obviously again to an offer that is only available at Target. The other thing is, granted, I know this is all kind of new, but thinking about the granularity you can get with the audience data at Target of looking back the last 3 months. Who has made a purchase within your category within the last 3 months, and going after those who may still be coming to Target and shopping at Target. I get that's kind of maybe a bigger ask for your Roundel team, but I think it's worth the question of maybe diving deeper into the specifics of the audiences that you're going after to go after those who are hopefully still shopping.
We've got another question came in, and Mallory, this one I think is up your alley. So I'll read it and then I'll have you respond to it. So I think programmatic media is a little bit newer to some folks. I mentioned it a few minutes ago. So the question was, what are the biggest pros of programmatic media to kind of help get clients/brands aligned? And again, I'll just sort of define what that is, and then Mallory, I'll have you talk about it. So again, programmatic media at Target, they make their audiences available, same exact audiences. You can say, somebody that has bought cereal category but has not bought my products. And then they create a deal ID, which is then usable in a DSP like Trade Desk or other, large DSPs as well. So it's really the same media, other than it's all offsite. They don't really do programmatic on site. There's a small use case that they do, but largely they don't. And so Mallory, I'll turn it over to you. So why would what are the benefits of doing it programmatically yourself in the space?
So a few things kind of right off the bat, it's a little more efficient and affordable. It's not going to be near as high of a CPM as managed services. Again, having been away for 5 years, I'm not certain on, minimums, but it gives you more flexibility to not have to commit to that $500,000, or maybe you commit to 250 via managed service and 250 via programmatic. And again, I think it's flexibility. I think it allows you are hands-on keyboard, or someone that is working for you is hands-on keyboard. And so it's, I think, more consistent and constant updates on how's the campaign performing, more flexibility and just awareness of how are these audiences performing? How can we make optimizations within the campaign and shift between these audiences, shift out? I think, to bubble that all up is its flexibility and visibility to the campaign itself.
And a very tactical thing, but it pops up for a lot of our clients. So we have some clients that are smaller challenger brands where we will run their paid search, and they don't have money for Roundel, at least not generally, right? But they might have money for one Roundel programmatic campaign that will run for them. And so it's a way to dip your toe if you're not a big budget brand to kind of get in. So that's a very tactical benefit for, again, a certain set of brands. The other is as simple as geo-targeting. So Roundel generally doesn't like to geo-target. If you're like, hey, I want to run a campaign, but only across the top 200 stores, that's not something they love to do. And so if you're doing it yourself, you can do that all day long. You can do kind of what you want within that space. And so you're much more flexible. So
one additional benefit, Dave, real quick, would be to our earlier conversation. If you're having conversations back with your brands have prime prospect targets they've identified for who would be great for this product or for this brand or for this line extension. They may not be thinking about retailer media network investments as ways to access those unique consumer groups. Being able to do that, I think, puts you in a different class of spending, because then you're going after the marketing targets as opposed to just whoever's in a Target store. So I think that could be a way to get into more conversations as well with your marketing counterparts up on the brand side.
Well, this was great, all. Lots of really great questions. I knew Roundel would be a little bit of a buzzy topic and have people of interested. So I want to thank Mallory and Graham for coming today. Thank you guys for coming. I think the term investment grade, I'd say go back, think about it for yourselves. Are you there? Ask your brand partners. Do you think of our retail media Roundel spin as investment grade? And if they don't, why not? Right. And kind of go through that step process to try to get it to that spot. It won't always be a linear line, but I think thinking of it that way will help people try to get more budgets, stay more flexible, and be able to earn the roundel of dollars as it makes sense. So thanks again for coming. As a follow-up, we will send this out, a link to the video, and we will be in touch. Have a great rest of the week, everybody.